Welcome, everyone. This is always a happy day for us because we get to see what the youngsters, so to speak, are up to in their research and what their aspirations are. And so we get a glimpse into the future. And as an educator, I am always interested in the future. Fionn Byrne was the Kiley Fellow last year, and as is typical, they end up staying and joining the faculty, and it gives them a chance also to expand their research or devote an additional year to their research. The Kiley Fellowship is, as you may know, one of our programs here at the school, and the purpose of the program is to invite young practitioners and scholars to spend the year reflecting on a project of their interest, but also engaging with students and learning how to teach. And so for us, it's a fantastic opportunity not just to cultivate you as the students, but cultivate the next generation of practitioners or researchers and faculty. Fionn has spent the 2 years working on the question of ethics and landscape architecture, or ethics and design. And this will be the topic of his talk today. Needless to say, this is really an important topic, and strangely enough, it doesn't receive enough attention certainly in the scholarship. We tend to practice in a way that is multivalent, and yet that means that the question of what is ethical in landscape needs to be broken down to what is ethical or not in a part of a project. And when he talks about the pluralism of ethics, I think this is what he means. He's going to take us in a great tour. I saw the presentation already. Get ready, literally, for a whirlwind tour around the globe of projects and landscapes. It is certainly really exciting to see the scope which he's addressing. Fionn has also had an interest in the Canadian bituminous sands, and we are also going to see part of this work in today's presentation. And then by way of background, I'll just end by saying that his professional practice includes working at HOK under Brian Jones in Toronto, Canada. He's worked in large planning projects there that combine issues of urban design, landscape architecture, and planning more broadly. So with that, I leave it to Fionn. I would like to also say, actually, before I forget, most importantly perhaps, I do want to thank you for these 2 years, because not only have you been, doing your work, but I can see that you've been a real companion to the students. I walk late through the studios, and there's Fionn, often sitting in the rug in one of the lounges, having conversations with the students. And I think the generosity that you've shown to them is much appreciated. So thank you for the 2 years.
Thank you, Anita, for that introduction. And I'd like to say thank you all to all of you for joining me today. I really enjoy giving presentations, and it's on days like this that I know I'm really fortunate to have this position, and I wouldn't trade it for any other occupation. So let's begin here. I'll have an hour of material, and I'll get through it in the time we have. So When introducing the Office for Urbanization earlier this year, Charles Waldheim pointed to this statement made by Herbert Simon, you see on the left there. It is a clear description which constitutes design research as being necessarily iterative and projective. Simon says, the natural sciences are concerned with how things are. Design, on the other hand, is concerned with how things ought to be. Yet for landscape architects, there is a long-enduring and troubling correspondence between descriptions of nature and the future continuity of the same nature as so described. Think, for example, of Mill's fantastic essay on nature in 1874, where he introduces it as being problematic that the ethical use of the word nature implies a close relation, if not absolute identity, between what is and what ought to be. We, of course, understand that the moral righteousness of nature at the time was in part imparted through religious association, yet we will also know that in philosophy and in law, the fundamental principle has always been to follow nature. In contemporary times, Donald Worster, a leading environmental historian, has said, in the absence of supernatural guidance, a scientific interpretation of nature is virtually our only remaining source of moral precepts. So while law, philosophy, and religion have otherwise negotiated the source of their ethics, in the environmental sciences, in the field of ecology, and to the greatest extent in the discipline of landscape architecture, a scientific understanding of nature both explains the world as found and makes claims about how the world should be. So when I read these three authors together, the conclusion that I draw is that climate change, as a potential threat to the continued existence of our species, has formed a singular environmental ethic predicated on the ability of the science of ecology to predict a knowable future. And this, I think, produces two undesirable conclusions and forecloses much of our ability as designers to represent alternative futures. The first is that any project that we do which does not slow the momentum of a warming planet can be said to be complicit in the downfall of our species. Thus, I think we have to act ecologically. The second is that even the most poorly designed space, which includes plant material, can be argued to be saving the planet. And as such, ecology trumps aesthetics. The paper I'm showing on the screen here is one which was published 8 days ago in a reputable journal, and it states that this century, we will very likely experience temperatures beyond any in the past 784,000 years. That's 784,000 years. Interestingly, I might comment that the gravity of nature, as personified by climate change, is again shaping ethics in law, where we can think of the 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris, and it is also shaping religion, where we could think of Laudato Si, the second encyclical letter by Pope Francis. So what do we do about this? Well, I can see two strategies emerging in our discipline. The first is to go up in scale. A global problem requires a global solution. As landscape architects, we can engage in planning, mapping, policy, or design at the regional or even global scale. We can work to transform the collective through structural design. An alternative, of course, is to reduce scale, to focus on intrinsic site characteristics, history, and materiality. In some cases, to even avoid ecology and its demand for futuring. In this way, we can work to transform individuals through their experiences. I am hopeful that there is room for both of these positions and a diversity between the two. If we acknowledge that our cultural interpretation of the science of ecology leads too easily to an environmental ethic that tells us about how the future ought to be and what we need to do to get there, then the role of design research must be to explore alternative ecologies, to challenge our ethics, and to envision multiple ways that this world could be. In short, I'm advocating for a pluralism of ecology, ethics, and aesthetics. Before showing you the exercises that I was working on last year, I will take a few more slides to expand on this close association between what is ecologically right and what is ethically right. In the following slides, I will always show the same format, where on the left you find a philosopher, in the center a landscape architect, and on the far right an exemplar of their built work. In the text below is support for the description that I will give. You will likely all be familiar with Pope's now famous maxim calling for the designers to consult the genius of the place. This is at once an ecological and ethical position. Pope believed that the aesthetic category of the beautiful would be achieved by exposing the inherent good found latent in any landscape. And in so doing, the good character of the landowner would be on display. What is critical here is that we can search for design strategies used by landscape architects at the time to realize this vision. So, for example, we can read differently Lancelot's Brown invention of the ha-ha, which comes from an unrelenting desire to remove any fences or obstructions from the landscape. The design strategy searches for a physical representation of truth, openness, and honesty. And while Capability Brown was a landscape gardener, I situate the next chapter around those who self-identify as landscape improvers. The word improvement necessarily means to make a site better, and it corresponds to an associated social improvement. It is also at this time that a narrative arc begins to play an important role in the discipline, where the aesthetic category of the beautiful brought the whole of the landscape into one fixed position. The picturesque, as advocated for Price, called for a movement through the landscape from wild to ordered, a story of redemption. Repton's Red Books are a narrative tool to communicate the possibility of improvement, where we see before and after scenes very clearly showing how the landscape will be improved. In the next chapter, we have John Ruskin, a leading figure in the social reform movement through the 19th century. And in relation to his writings, Downing sought to develop a design aesthetic that could be applied at a larger scale, bringing the agrarian and rural lands into an ordered and organized whole. Social improvement through landscape design would not just be for the wealthy landowner, but also for all those who worked and lived off the land. The ornamental farm is an example of how Downing worked to incorporate agricultural lands into the shared geometry of the house and the grounds. Next, we have Olmsted. He is the first to use the title landscape architect. With Vaux, Olmsted designed Central Park. Olmsted's design for Central Park was meant to provide the opportunity for transcendental experience. Light reflecting off water or light filtering through the trees was at once a direct method to clean urban air, an ecological function, and at the same time, it was a method to improve the mental health of the working class, an ethical obligation to improve the conditions of the citizens. Thoreau's maxim, "In wilderness is the salvation of the world," was packaged and inserted into the urban condition of Central Park. After Olmsted, as I have said, I contend that landscape architecture can be seen to move in two dominant directions. The environmental movement and Leopold's land ethic are taken up by McHarg, who calls for design with nature. The science of ecology reveals both the intrinsic value and the direction of natural processes. Our role as designers is then to facilitate that which nature desires. At the same time, we have the modernist designers, Kiley, for example, who are refreshingly concerned with formal over process-based design. Yet the search remains for a transcendental experience through understanding and controlling nature. Kiley often directed quotes from Emerson in his writing, and a search for the sacred is made physical in his commitment to an ordered geometry. So this then is my point of departure, and I ask if ecological good is always ethical good. Are they one and the same, or is this subject to critique? And of course, it is certainly subject to critique. In film, in news media, Facebook, Tumblr, and Instagram, we are collectively engaging in a debate on what is ethically and ecologically just. In the past year and a half here at Harvard, I have had the absolute privilege to attend lectures at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies, the Miranda Humanities Center, and the Center for the Environment, where I've heard time and time again that we need alternative models for the future. And I come away each time with renewed determination that we as designers have the training to give physical form to these alternative futures. So we arrive here, and I will ask you to try to think of a design project in landscape architecture which knowingly falls outside of the first category. It is no easy task, and being unable to easily collect a set of precedents to establish the other categories, the first project I will show you is one where I was attempting to drive a wedge between what is ecologically and ethically right. It attempts to affirmatively answer the first question on the left: is it possible to do ecologically good in an ethically reprehensible way? So Operation Hello Eden is a continuation of my thesis exercise from the University of Toronto, and it was published a few years later after I figured out what it was that I had done. By itself, I am hopeful that this view will substantiate my argument. This phased rendering shows an ethically deplorable technology being used to remotely generate greater biodiversity in an otherwise severely challenged environment. This is not a swords to plowshares project, as I'm not interested in legitimating swords or their alternative use in the future. The logic of the project is clear. I first identify a locally threatened, yet remote and globally important habitat. The site for this exercise was the Cauca Valley in Colombia, a linear mountainous forest area that has experienced nearly 90% loss of wetland habitat over the past 50 years. This loss is due in part to the development of hydroelectric dams and their associated reservoirs. The image here on the map, on the left you see protected wetlands, and on the right-hand side you see the reservoirs of the nation. A new hydroelectric project, larger in scale than any in the country, the Pescadero Itengo Dam, is the site for the intervention that's seen here on the far right. In the project, I then argue that doing nothing would result in a near total environmental reduction. Imagine a reservoir in a region that experiences considerable rainfall in the wet season and very little rain in the dry season. Yet over the course of the year, the turbines must continue at the same rate. So during the dry season, a lot of water will be drawn out of the reservoir. This is called the drawdown, and it can be seen clearly in the photograph in the bottom right-hand side. This wide fluctuation in environmental conditions also drastically reduces the number of species that can survive. You see that also in the image. The three sections that you see here show the existing condition at the top, the projected future without action in the middle, and the ideal condition which supports a more complex hydrologic regime and greater biodiversity at the bottom. The project operated at the very large scale, mapping zones of intervention through a study of topography and hydrology, looking for large flat areas which are situated adjacent to the projected height of the reservoir, which would be ideal for future wetlands. At the site scale, 4 bombing runs were localized along the edge of the high water zone and overlapped in an area of intense runoff. Finally, the project also operated at the detailed level, whereas the specifics of cratering, detonation depth, and the size of ordnances change the topographic profile to best suit different habitats. So it is ecologically good and ethically objectionable. At the same time, these remotely produced wetland habitats also fit the criteria for international protection, meeting, for example, the requirements of the Ramsar organization. And to build on this a bit and make a segue into the next project that I will show you, this is a project I did a few years ago where I've subtly altered the remarks of President Barack Obama at the National Defense University in 2013. I have removed references to terror and replaced the languages with references to nature. And I'll read this for you. Moreover, America's actions are legal. We were attacked on 8/29 with Hurricane Katrina and again on 10/29 with Hurricane Sandy. Under domestic law and international law, the United States is at war with nature, the environment, and their associated forces. We are at war with a changing climate that right now would kill as many Americans as she could if we did not stop her first. So this is a just war, a war waged proportionally, in last resort, and in self-defense. And yet, as our fight enters a new phase, America's legitimate claim of self-defense cannot be the end of the discussion. To say ecological science is legal or even effective is not to say it is wise or moral in every instance. For the same human progress that gives us technology to design half a world away also demands the discipline to constrain that power or risk abusing it. And that's why over the last 4 years, my administration has worked vigorously to establish a framework that governs our use of force against nature, insisting upon clear guidelines, oversight, and accountability that are now codified as presidential policy guidelines that I signed yesterday. To be clear, guidelines on how the United States will respond to the unequal distribution of climate change, both the impacts on other nations and any preemptive action that we would take to curb threats, are as yet not a serious part of the conversation. As a global phenomenon, climate change threatens the sovereignty of nations. So while Operation Halloween was looking to substantiate an argument that you could do ecological good in an ethically objectionable way, this project, The Softest Power, asks, what are the potential negative consequences of a close correlation between that which is ecologically good and that which is ethically good? How can this correlation be taken advantage of? Excuse me. The research for this project began and has been occupying some of my time since 2010. I'm again very grateful for the opportunity I've had here over this past year to give it more focus. A first draft of a publication that I'm putting together is done, but this still requires more work. I will begin the discussion here. The Department of Defense established a Commander's Emergency Response Program, CERP, in Afghanistan in 2004. The program was designed to allow military commanders to spend money on reconstruction projects and urgent humanitarian relief. Yet from the title of the project, it should be clear to all that reconstruction efforts and humanitarian work was in service of winning the war. So we can say either money as a weapon system, or reconstruction as a weapon system, or humanitarian relief as a weapon system. CERP projects were implemented in all 34 Afghan provinces, with the greatest number completed in Helmand and Kandahar province. In total, between fiscal year 2004 and fiscal year 2014, Congress appropriated $3.7 billion for CERP. My work contributes 4 additional project proposals. They aim to demonstrate the value of using landscape architecture as an effective design tool and a multidisciplinary framework to organize future CERP-type projects. As I show you the new proposals I have made, I will present them alongside with both approved CERP initiatives and exemplary works of landscape architecture. This demonstrates the expert knowledge already in our field, ready to be leveraged for a more concentrated effort to utilize landscape architectural design towards environmental and social improvement through reconstruction projects. Already in this context, if I read Patrick Schumacher's position, you would likely understand the project. I had the pleasure of hearing Schumacher give a talk only a few weeks ago here at the GSD. In a discussion and his writing, his position on the responsibility of architecture is clear. I will read you some of the points that he has made. Architecture is responsible for the built environment's social performance. Engineering is responsible for the built environment's technical performance. The social process needs the built environment as a plane of inscription where it can leave traces that then serve to build up and stabilize social structures. Appropriately designed places regulate social communication by helping to define the situation, remind the actors who they are, ordering the actors into their appropriate relative position. So the distinction Schumacher makes between engineering and architecture is helpful. It follows that the relationship between civil engineers and landscape architects would resemble closely this relationship between structural engineers and architects. While engineers are primarily concerned with technical responses to acute challenges, architects contribute to the design problem with the possibility of stabilizing, regulating, and ordering social structures. In the same way, landscape architectural design can be leveraged for sustained economic benefit and shorter-term counterinsurgency effects through environmental and ultimately social modification. On the left-hand side of the spread is the org chart for CERP, which at every level of funding includes the profession of the engineer. In the black box, I'm including the proposed edition of landscape architecture. While this may seem rather unpalatable to some, it is not at all beyond the scope of our work. In this graphic are the 19 official authorized uses of CERP funds. Landscape architects stand to make a direct contribution to projects in categories labeled primary, whereas categories labeled secondary could see indirect benefits from our services and a more general multidisciplinary design thinking. The primary categories include agriculture, civic cleanup activities, small business capacity building, food production, protective measures, water and sanitation. Today I will show you 2 of the 4 proposals which make up this work. The first is Operation Desert Bloom. Afghanistan has a long and rich garden and horticultural tradition. Over the years, sophisticated irrigation systems were constructed to deliver water to croplands and pleasure gardens. Forests and orchards were abundant, and our natural products were central to the national economy. Unfortunately, war and drought has decimated much of the landscape, destroyed irrigation infrastructure, and deforested a massive portion of the once lush country. It was Herodotus who once called Herat the breadbasket of Central Asia. Located in a fertile river valley, Herat has been an important city in the history of many empires. As the capital of the Turkmen dynasty, Herat was a center of arts and education and saw investment in lush parks and monuments. While many of the historic monuments and much of the natural resources and parks have been destroyed by years of fighting, Herat continues to rebuild, aided with outside investment from both the United States and from Iran. Herat occupies a strategically important position between Iran to the west and Kandahar and the Afghan interior to the east. Tareki Park, at the center of Herat, makes manifest this connection. Built around the intersection of the Islam Kala Herat Highway and the Kandahar Herat Highway, the large open space is unique in downtown Herat. Excuse me. Recent investment has been made in improvements to Tareki Park. This work has been managed by the Italian Provincial Reconstruction Team and funded by the US government through SERP funds. $330,911 was budgeted for the construction of a new soccer field and upgrade to the park's open irrigation system. While these improvements helped with specific issues, the park continues to lack from a cohesive identity. Before showing you my proposal, let us first consider two characteristics of landscape design. First, the work of landscape architecture evolves and improves through time. A limited upfront investment in gardens, parks, and natural systems will increase their return of social, economic, and environmental benefit over time. This is unlike architecture or traditional infrastructure, which deteriorates in time. Second, there is a growing body of evidence that exposure to nature delivers both short and long-term physical and mental health benefits. Taken together, these two characteristics show the potential of landscape design to enact a slow transformation of a physical and psychological environment. Landscape architecture presents itself as a powerful tool for winning hearts and minds. As such, SERP would have benefited from the input of design thinking of landscape architectural professionals. This set of SERP projects, this here is a sample set of SERP projects to demonstrate the different forms in which landscape architecture design has already been deployed in Afghanistan for rebuilding and reconstruction efforts. Parks and green spaces, along with an actual realized project for Tareki Park, have been integral to SERP. To be specific, I will read one of the project descriptions for a route Francine in Kandahar, where a total of $733,000 was spent. The description reads, "The mayor, along with the community, has recognized the benefit of green spaces because they can help to support the stabilization of this municipality. The planned green space will beautify an undeveloped area of the district by planting trees, building playgrounds and a soccer field, providing benches, a walkway, and installing solar lights. Not only will Route Francine green space be a highly visible symbol of the district's transformation, but will also provide the necessary meeting area where residents can begin to have a sense of normalcy in their day-to-day activities in one of the most populated yet underserved districts of Kandahar City." So Operation Desert Bloom is a landscape strategy to order, organize, and control Tareki Park's perimeter. All vehicular circulation and associated programs such as market stalls are kept outside of the park, leaving the internal space visibly and physically open to all manner of large and small program activities. A continuous security gabion barrier is sunken to a comfortable 450 millimeter seat wall depth, producing a 9-meter passively irrigated and porous moat. Banding of the existing pine trees throws shades on areas well suited for passing sunny Herat afternoons. For the landscape architects here, we can imagine Hassel's culturally sensitive work in Australia for Afghan expats, combined with Olin's exceptional integration of security barriers in the Washington Monument landscape. The detail looks like this. The 450 millimeter seat wall you see on the right is level with the urban fabric, but now separated by a 9-meter, 5% slope, passively irrigating a continuous park perimeter facade. The second project is Operation Soft Touch. Soft Touch is focused on the Kandahar International Airport, KDH, which was built in the 1960s by the United States with US aid funds. It has a long history of use as a military airbase, first occupied by the United States, then by the Soviet Union in the 1980s, and again by the US forces during 2001 for Operation Enduring Freedom. Currently, it is maintained by NATO forces. KDH is the second most important international airport in Afghanistan and one of the largest military bases in the country. It is located southeast of the city of Kandahar. KDH is sited in peripheral agricultural lands. As of January 2012, the airfield supported a population of approximately 26,000 personnel. A central feature of the airport is the open-air wastewater pond. And you can see it here, the dark circular object in the center of the frame. The open-air wastewater pond collects the waste of 1,800 portable toilets and the airfield's commercial kitchen grease and oil. It is recognized that a wastewater treatment plant would be superior on all accounts to the open pond, but this construction project remains unimplemented. Worse yet, a concrete overflow channel can be seen carrying wastewater off the airport lands towards agricultural lands. This zone of waste discharge is the test site of Operation Soft Touch. It is accepted that the combined liquid waste left untreated is hazardous for human health. The waste taken up in this pond is greater than typical forward operating bases, but the use of open-air retention ponds is not uncommon for challenging operational environments. Looking again to SERP for precedent, in the village of Nuralam, $94,000 was spent towards construction of check dams, reforestation, specifically native plant restoration, and sedimentation catch basins. This is a proposal for Operation Soft Touch. It has been shown that construction of wetlands can be used successfully to treat a variety of wastewaters, including urban runoff, municipal, industrial, and agricultural discharge. These shallow ponds are planted with vegetation, with acts to support water treatment through microbial, biological, physical, and chemical processes. Operation Soft Touch deploys a wastewater treatment wetland to clean and treat the discharge from the Kandahar International Airport. In this instance, we could think of PREX's exemplary wetland machine, which did research on criteria for successful water treatment, or we could think of Truanscape's treatment wetland park that integrates successfully a treatment wetland into an urban setting. For this project, standard use sandbags are here deployed to form a dike wall. They establish a series of biological wastewater treatment ponds. The organization of the dike wall controls retention time and exposure to plant root system. Discharge from the airfield is progressively cleaned as it moves through the landscape system. The sandbags can be either pliable if filled with sand or hardened if filled with concrete, depending on the permanence of the system and the level of control needed over the water's movement. In one image each, I will show you the other two projects. The one is Operation Greenwall, which combines almond trees with typical military sheet metal to form a shelter belt along the wind-swept northern ring road in Kabul. And Operation Enduring Legacy, which proposes the planting of pomegranate trees on Hasko-Bastian barriers, which act as sediment traps, reducing overall sediment load in the upper Helmand River watershed. So at the start of last year, when I began concentrating on that work, I thought I was going to make strong claims about how we conduct landscape architecture domestically. I thought the international work would show landscape acting as an opiate of the masses, if you will. Where I would argue that back in the US, our discussion of sustainability simply prolongs this time of comfort, but does not address strongly enough the realities of climate change. However, as I completed the design exercises, I became more aware of the fact that the work of reconstruction is now constantly ongoing internationally. And so I can say I've not spent enough time with the project to give you a definitive conclusion on my position today, but I can say that the project has helped to reinforce in me that designers must take seriously our social responsibility. It is clearly challenging to know when to work within a system and when it is that we should reject that system outright. So as I introduce this last project, I'll also tell you something else that I've been able to see through the work. I can tell you that the previous work problematized what constitutes a shared environmental ethic. And today, as a rift widens between ecology and ethics, such that we can no longer argue for designing with nature because it is the right thing to do, I ask, how else do we substantiate an argument for design with nature? So in this second publication is titled Phantom Ecology, and it'll take me another couple months to release this one. As I present the project today, I will ask you this question: why do we need nature? Here, in the second image, the formulation of what constitutes ecology is an unsustainable use of resources. It has limited biodiversity, and it is socially exclusive. In the third image, nature can be anywhere. It is eminently social, and it reduces resource demand. These, I would think, are all good things. If ecological value is the primary metric we use, nature will be lost to technology. My point of view is that from my point of view, the most common defense is a loss of secular spirituality. I was privileged to see Terry Tempest Williams give a lecture this year, and she does an incredible job of articulating this. But this argument can be and is easily dismissed. Others will argue for a need for continuity, continuity of time, continuity of history, or continuity of place. But anyone who has spent hours on Facebook will know that technology is at once obliterating any notion of conventional time, and technology is also gaining greater capability to simulate our worlds. This is evidenced in the fourth image, a VR experience of nature. I am today going to argue for the unknowable as an important part of our experience in the world. Simulation can only duplicate that which can be perceived. Remediation and restoration, or really any design with ecology, is limited to a human-centric perspective. If we accept that there may be forces and flows acting in the world beyond our technological or sensory apparatus, then we must defend nature, seek to include it in our design work, and open ourselves to experiencing that which is greater than the physical environment. So while the phenomenology of nature is certainly not new to landscape architecture, in this project I'm following Farsaid Mousavi's lead when she says, style must be defined differently today, not as a representation, but as a source of action through the political potency of effect. In the project I will show you, I'm attempting to move beyond the invisible to gain access to the unknowable. Again, the work of mapping has been critical to gaining access to the invisible, and this has been transformative of our field. Adding the unknowable, both the impossibility of knowing from another's perspective and our own always incomplete perspective of nature, should make manifest our designs differently. To explore this, in the exercises, I'm using very simple landscape design elements in combination with reduced environments. In so doing, I'm trying to demonstrate a condition where the experience is believed to be greater than the sum of the parts. So in this work, Phantom Ecology, I am testing the capability of effect to produce transformative experiences that will encourage visitors to reconsider their dependence on fossil fuels. You are here looking at a map of the Athabasca bituminous sands in northern Alberta, Canada. To give you a sense of scale, the box I'm going to zoom in on, you see here in the center, is compared with the island of Manhattan on the left, which may be too faint to read, but both are comparable in scale. We are looking here at Syncrude Canada Limited's main operations in the center of the image, and Suncor Energy Incorporated's site on the right. Just beyond which you can see the Athabasca River winding here to the north in the image. Highway 63 is the main access road to the bituminous sands, and it is highlighted on the image as well. Off map to the south is Fort McMurray, where most of the employees live, and if you continue north, you arrive at Fort McKay. Today, there are 5 public stops along this route. They showcase the technology of extraction, remediation, and our sites of recreation or information points. My work adds 5 new points of rest on this public circuit and proposes upgrades to the existing sites. To any of you in the room who don't know, the process of extraction in this site to gain access to oil is fairly straightforward. First, and you see it in the image here as well, first you cut down the trees, then you drain the water, you clear the organic components of the soil, which is called overburden, and you stockpile that later for remediation. Then, with bucket excavators and dump trucks, you move mass volumes of earth. The target is extraction of bitumen, and it is found bound to sand. I like this photo I took in 2013 because it will remind you of the scale. You see at the center here what looks to be a small dump truck, which is actually normal size, but just dwarfed by the other buckets. The bituminous sand is moved to where it is upgraded. At this point, high temperature water is mixed with earth to separate oil from sand. The main waste products that are left over are enormous quantities of liquid sludge from all the water and considerable amounts of sand. To this, there is also petroleum coke and sulfur, among other wastes. I will show you 3 of the 10 rest stops today. The first is Petcoke Lake. Petroleum coke or pet coke is a byproduct of upgraded bitumen. It does have economic value, but the logistics of moving the product from northern Alberta to market is difficult. Petroleum coke can be burned for energy, but because it has such a high carbon content, it releases even more carbon dioxide than coal. As a result, there are vast stockpiles of pet coke in the Athabasca bituminous sands region. Suncor Energy Incorporated has been testing the use of pet coke to remediate the toxic lakes. The process is called coke capping and involves spreading petroleum coke over the toxic lake into winter when the water is frozen. When it thaws into spring, the petroleum coke remains buoyant and is strong enough to carry machinery used to layer more pet coke over the lake. The image on the right shows you the ordered spreading of this dark black pet coke over pond 5. Wick drains are inserted through the coke cap to remove water from the tailings lake. Once this process is complete, dry tailings will be isolated with a barrier of petroleum coke. On top, a new stratum can be spread, typically sand, upon which we will typically add vegetation. In the image here, you see a plan view of the parking, an overlook, and a procession to a final rest stop. Suncor is using this technique on Pond 5, an innocuous name for 230-hectare toxic tailing lake. This then is a temporary stop until the pet coke is layered with sand and ultimately a layer of topsoil. The elevated platform seen here pushes the deep black of the 90% carbon petroleum coke back into the horizon against the Suncor refinery, while the sunken platform gives only the sky as an escape from the light-absorbing petroleum coke. The most important element of this project is the white concrete bench. It is large enough for the user to consider the object as being designed for multiple individuals, which is a comforting thought of not being alone. Yet being non-directional, it reinforces the unescapable immersion in this landscape of waste. Our second stop is the Sulphur Plateau. The sulfur piles are truly incredible. As the bitumen is upgraded, washed, and separated, sulfur is one of the end byproducts. First, as a liquid, it is poured out onto layers 10 to 20 meters high, where it then solidifies into a stepped pyramid. While there exists a global market for sulfur, the price of the commodity fluctuates, and again, transportation from northern Alberta to market is difficult. Already in the year 2000, Canada was ranked second in global sulfur production. The proposal here has parking and showers, which lead to a procession point between an existing opening in the pyramid. Visitors move briskly towards a set of stairs at the far end. Excuse me, and are then required to ascend without landing to the top. The extent of this top surface is approximately 250 by 320 meters. The beauty of the unique experience of the yellow sulfur block against the horizon is only to be interrupted by thoughts of the ecological impacts on biodiversity of producing singular environments, on the damaging effects of this volume of sulfur on adjacent environments, and by the unpalatable smell of sulfur itself. This project depends on the stair. The risers are closed and the stair ascends steeply. Visitors will be physically weakened as they reach the summit, prepared to sit down and allow the landscape to engulf them. And finally, we arrive at the SAG-D well. Only 20% of the bitumen can be extracted with conventional surface mining, the method that I have described today. The remaining majority of bitumen is found too far below ground to make it cost-effective to excavate. SAG-D, or steam-assisted gravity drainage, is the method that has been developed to access these deep bitumen reserves. SAG-D is described as a rather benign extraction method by the oil and gas industry. A well pad is connected to an underground network of paired horizontal wells. Steam is pumped down one well, where it mixes with and melts the bitumen below ground. The resultant mixture is then able to be collected and pumped up through an adjacent well. It is a literal act of melting the earth. Traces of the well pads are clearly visible across the once intact boreal forest. The parking facilities provide access to a no longer used well pad. Visitors then make a procession from the entry area to a clearing deep in the forest. This proposal opens the well to a space able to be occupied. We see the moment of descent, a winding stair with alternating landings. Darkness, silence, cold, and a relentless stare will reduce the sensory inputs and force attention to the slowly changing textures and colors of the earth. Visitors descend 1,300 feet, or around 400 meters into the earth, the average depth of bitumen deposits. The despair of descent is offset by the singular experience of being in proximity to the Earth at such a depth. The desire to accelerate the climb out is slowed by the need to watch one step. The success of the project is also dependent on a stair. In this case, to heighten the experience, there is only a string on one side of the stair, so the treads hang from the earth. The handrail is a cold steel square tube, providing safety but not comfort. And with open risers and porous treads, descending light is beautifully filtered through, yet these same details also induce fear from vertigo. So we have a sense of the overall project. I will run through the sequence of the 10 rest stops, and I will show you that in each case, the design elements only change subtly to attempt to make the greatest impact. Petcoke Lake, you have seen. The Boreal Forest Overlook platform takes visitors into the forest and provides them with a view away from the bituminous sands operations. You have seen the well and the Sulphur Plateau. Site 5 is a floating platform extended out over the Mildred Lake settling basin, a toxic lake which by volume of construction material is the largest earthen structure in the world. The next 5 sites are existing on a tourist route. This proposal simply asks for a visual uncluttering to make more powerful the experience of the industrial sublime, where this unused machinery is on display. At Wood Bison Trail, a light wooden structure sourced locally from logged boreal forest is extended out over the toxic tailing pond. Site 8. The first tailings pond was capped in 2011 with 30 million tons of sand and then topped with 50 centimeters of topsoil. So this then is an artificial beach floating above a layer of sand, which itself floats above a semi-solid toxic lake. At Site 9, there is an introduction of new nesting habitats placed into Crane Lake. It is one of the only clean lakes in the area. The 16,006 poles marked the death of 16,006 birds in 2008 at the nearby Mildred Lake settling basin. Finally, Sandhill Fen is the largest fen restoration project on record. Sunken into the landscape, visitors gain access to the immediate beauty of the vegetation, which remains unfortunately dependent on the input of fertilizers, fresh water, and an underdrain control system. So, before I end my lecture, I would like to spend a moment more with 3 diagrams. I know not when I will have another opportunity to lecture here at Harvard in a public setting like this, so I want to say what I believe to be truly important. In the modernist worldview, it is believed that beyond us is an unbiased, knowable, and measurable external world. Maximum biodiversity represents the greatest number of subjects within this world. But if we accept the postmodern position that there is no unmediated external world, then 2 things happen. 1, who you are means nothing. What you look like, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your genes, your history, even your species, we are all equal in our contribution to the construction of a collective world. And importantly, number 2, who you are means everything. The richness of our world is predicated on a diversity of perspectives. With this way of thinking, we will also understand that biodiversity actually constructs the world. What can be thought and imagined is produced by the diverse participation of all life. And so, the mass extinction of species from the planet is not a metaphor for a reduced world. It is a literal reduction in the richness of our collective experience. I implore you to reconsider Ian McHarg's dictum and to design with nature, yet also to recognize the plurality of that which constitutes nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Tall order. My goodness. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you for your lecture. I actually have a question about Operation Desert Blue. And Oh, thank you very much. I am really uncomfortable with the language of militarization that is obviously used in not only describing the name that you've chosen to give to the design project, but also the use of infrastructure of militarization in a place which is occupied that might be reminiscent to Afghans of the violence they've been through. And also how you think the use of design can be justified, like from an ethical position, as a tool or as an arm to what is essentially, from the point of view of many, including legal scholars, a place of occupation and militarization. So would design just function and assume like the position of power to be a correct position without having to substantiate itself, which I think Operation Desert Bloom seems implicitly to assume.
Perhaps I wasn't clear enough that that's not a proposal. I'm not suggesting that we do that, but I'm allowing myself to be able to do the representation of what it would like if we did, to be able to then ask myself, do I want to engage in this, or should we not engage with this? So it's a way of projecting with our tools of representation to put myself in an uncomfortable position to be able to then either substantiate a defense for why it is we should not engage with this, or to be able to say perhaps this is something that we should engage in. It is absolutely not a proposal that says this is what we should be doing in the world, but it is meant to begin a discussion about, is this the right way of acting or not? And in absence of this discussion, it takes place that the SERP is currently doing landscape architecture without the involvement of landscape architects. So again, it's very troubling, because I could participate through that system and make those designs better, or in some instances, I may want to resist that system totally. And I can't say today which is the best of the two alternatives, but the representation allows me to make the first effort to put myself into that position to say, what would it be like, and am I comfortable with this or am I not comfortable with this? But it is absolutely not a proposal to, I mean, I've not handed this, I've not made this to the military, that it is a thought experiment first and foremost. And I should also say that the work it is personal to me also, that these are not design competitions. No one is paying me to do this work. I have, it's not even part of the description of the particular job that I have. So this is experiments that I'm conducting in my time to be able to understand better the world that I find myself in.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a similar question actually, which is in a way, there's a deep contradiction between not wanting to tackle the ethical and just drawing the non-ethical. But more importantly, shouldn't you be, in a way, unpacking how each project may be a kind of sequence of layers of ethical and non-ethical, but more importantly, why? Because it was not clear to me in the first example when you said that using the drone to open up the holes for the wetlands was unethical. I didn't know what aspect of that was. Mm-hmm. Certainly making wetlands seems, the correct thing to do. And then the other is, you had an image in the project in the Middle East also showing somebody working in the wetland strips that you were proposing, and so now we understand that this is not a proposal, or that this is the proposal that you would criticize and that are drawing to criticize, but would that then produce the counter proposal that more directly would the ethical position be to address the situation of the person that's being asked to rate this wetland? So how do you begin to actually construct such a discourse of how to approach it?
It's a great question, and I don't want to don't want to let myself off the hook too easily, but I can say that I have a lot of work to do. That in the first chapters that I present, where I go through the history of landscape architecture, and I say to all of you that it's ethically good and ecologically good, that actually the challenge Mark Laird brought to me is that when you look back at the work Capability Brown was doing, he said, no, I disagree with you that it's actually ethically unjust and ecologically damaging. And so there's a lot to do yet about unpacking the relationships that we have. So this presentation comes after a year of work that I've been doing to start to set the scene, to allow the framework within which I can have the discussion. But I have a considerable amount to do to be able to target ethics directly, such that we can, it's quite an onerous task, and to be able to nail down on how it is that we come to arrive at ethics. Obviously, a shared discussion amongst the populace, but it's a significant challenge, and so there's lots of work ahead for me to do. So I'll still be in school every day for a long time. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, I'm wondering if you could speak more about your formulation of ethics as a guide against which to weigh design, because it seems to me, obviously what Mahram said about the speculative projects in Afghanistan being an extension of imperialism, obviously that's really troubling, but arguably American imperialism has expanded unabated for the past 30 years and will continue to expand. And if we are ethical agents who have design responsibility and political responsibility, and that imperialism is going to happen, well, if you said there is untreated water flowing to Afghan farms, do you see a future where we can, as landscape architects, resist imperialism yet co-opt those imperialist structures that exist outside of our agency, but that we are nevertheless participatory in? I guess what I'm saying is, do you see that project? Is there a way that project could become a project and still be ethically good?
Yeah, again, I have to say I don't really know. That this is the political climate that we're in right now. Do you work within the system and find the opportunity to make it better from within? Or do you resist from outside and not participate and find your action to be able to speak more about changing the system outright? I want to say that the second is the better option, but I also know that people live in the world, and so the project that I describe aspires to make better the conditions of those people that live in the world. And so I don't want to foreclose the possibility of having good design in other situations. So I'm internally conflicted that I am as yet not able to give a definitive answer to that question. Again, I'll say hopefully in time, as I continue to pursue this, that I will be able to speak more clearly about which of the two is the best strategy. But as yet, I'm unable to answer the question. Apart from saying I like both options, and I'm hopeful both. So it's not. Yeah. And actually, that's the good point, that having this discussion is, I think, the important thing. That's what I'm trying to set up, is the ability to actually have the discussion. If not, it continues without us being involved in it. So.
Hey, so
Excuse me.
This might be wrong, but I have a feeling that what you've been presenting to us in representation class, that's kind of like history of landscape representation, is this tied into this thesis as well? Are you looking at it from the lens of like evolution representation, what it means in ethics?
Yes, absolutely. I don't speak about all of it. Every single slide, I think, almost every slide that I'm showing today it's all representation. It's work that I've done to be able to put together the arguments. Let's say, for example, in Operation Hello Eden, where I have the the raster material of the terrain on top of a grid that's below it. That's also, in that project, if I unpack that more, that's a way of looking at our ability to believe of the world as being digital, not real, that the digital comes first, the real is layered over top of that, or the textured over top of that. And that's also, again, if we get into that project, we have to problematize also Google Earth, as we have to ask, is that an ethical technology that we can make use of? And so the digital is not unbiased. It is brought into the argument as well. But that's a talk for another day.
On the golf course slide, there was a small reference to secular spirituality. Can you say a little bit more about your thoughts on that and landscape's role?
Yeah. Maybe I'll describe Terry Tempest Williams' talk a little bit more. She spoke about an experience with, in the U.S., an experience with buffalo, where she saw the species and there's a connection made. And she argues about the undescribable power of that experience and being unique and unable to be simulated. But the mood in the room is very much that as much as she describes the experience, that unless we are also able to have the experience, there's a rift between the two. And so I think there's a large amount of the population today who does not recognize what that experience is. They have not had the transcendental experience with nature. And so when we argue that experience is necessary in our lives, it falls on deaf ears. That I don't think it can be communicated without the shared experience there. So that argument is dismissed. And then when we move to technologies which aspire to replicate the qualities of nature, that experience is never able to be duplicated. But that's what I was. There's obviously a lot more in those statements that I'm starting to make there. But I feel that moving to the unknown, to be able to describe this as great, the experience greater than just the objects that are in the particular moment is we will have to be able to articulate that better and defend that position. Excuse me.
Hey, Fionn.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I have a question that is maybe about scale, but also about your sort of saying, like, I'm interested in reflecting back on how this happens domestically in the US or in Canada, mm-hmm. and also thinking about some of the historical precedents. You talk about sort of Central Park and mm-hmm. and these sort of smaller urban scale projects rather than industrial scale projects, mm-hmm. and just like reflecting on the history of something like Central Park, which maybe was intended for a social good of social health, but also the way it happened, like communities were displaced. There's also social ill yeah. and unethical decision making in the design of those places. So given that history and the scale and then all the international work, I'm curious where you see coming back to look domestically. Is it at tar sands landscapes and
No, it's at everything. I mean, the discussion of our the reasons for what it is that we do, that ethics should always be integral to all projects at any scale, which is why I'm also trying to show very small design moves, to say that the bench is not without repercussions for how it is that we live in the world. So that we should always be thinking about this way. Who it is that we're designing for, who is being excluded from our designs, and how is it that we can own up to that, and in some cases that is how we design, or in other cases we can open up the design to being more inclusive to all manner of people and other species as well. But absolutely, it's in every scale and it's in every project, which hopefully I'm saying in the start of the presentation as well. Thank you. Okay. This is more stressful than the presentation. I thought it was going to be the other way around.
Hi, Fionn. So the sort of point came up a couple times earlier about the question of whether you work within the existing structures or whether you walk away, and sort of your ability to accede to or to influence things. And I wonder if that's maybe, that sort of recurrence of that question is maybe part of a broader split where we can see landscape architecture design as concerned with certain means of action and production and phenomenology and ecology and these sort of ideas. And then it's also, we can also see it in a professional definition as sort of an industry that occurs briefly in between the finance and construction industries. And you work for someone, and therefore our agency is in some way limited to who we choose to work for or who we don't. And so I wonder if it might be productive to somehow, if it could be productive to decouple those in a certain sense, so that we no longer have to justify perhaps questions of experience and ecology and restoration within the sort of professional frameworks of project delivery and finance and so on, or whether there's something limiting about having to sort of reconcile those two every moment.
And you would probably also think that the ASLA could have a stronger definition of what is ethics, what is ethically just. That you know, we're reading this stuff about the responses to Trump's election and the ethical discomfort of being associated with the statements that were made that the architectural organization will be, the AA will be working with Trump. That in landscape architecture, there's also a code of ethics in the ASLA. So being far more clear about our roles and responsibilities, how it is that we work within a system that we have in the professional organizations, I think would also be a very useful thing to be far more clear about. If you read right now what the description is, it's subject to considerable interpretation of what warrants an ethically just or ethically unjust project. So I am hopeful that we can begin to also have that discussion about. I'm not operating within the profession in those bounds, but in there, how it is that we describe what it is that we do and what it is that we will not do. And that should be, of course, an always ongoing discussion. That it's never, if anything is true, ethics are never fixed. They are actively constructed by us, and so the discussion needs to continue to evolve those through time. Okay.
So looking at your interventions in the landscape in Canada, it's thinking about why people would want to go to these places, especially the Sulphur Mountain that you have to climb. I felt like your designs were kind of more aesthetically pleasing, and that there was this almost fetishization of the place. So I wondered how you might talk about the aesthetics and our like moral responsibility to not just accept this as beautiful, but also as problematic.
Yeah, I want both. When I went to the Bituminous Sands, it was amazing. And actually, I should say one of the important things was you fly over from Toronto, and you go past urban areas, and then past farmland, and then you descend into the city of Alberta. And then when you get to Fort McMurray and the oil sands, it's very hard not to think also that, well, all that farmland and all those cities were also forests at some point, and they were also cleared and drained and built upon. And so there's a moment where the critique extends far beyond this actual site. That's our focus, is like right here, we're actively destroying the forest. But we did it the whole way across the country to arrive at that point. We've already done that. And the experience when you're there, as I show in the images, I'm using my techniques to be able to isolate certain moments, but a lot of the renderings that I show are using site photographs that I've taken of the place. So it is a very powerful experience, and it's awe-inspiring when you're there. At the same time, it's that project, you can see that my objective is that it's atrocious what is happening there. It's a total destruction of the environment, a total reduction of the biodiversity, and the impacts are far greater than the site. So I'm hopeful that perhaps more in the description of the projects that I aspire to having moments where the experience is one both that you're drawn to, and that your like mind loosens by the awe that you feel, but at the same time there's a naggingness which says this is not right. And so in each case I've described like the smell of the sulfur, which is totally impalpable. In the Petcoke Lake, it's the absolute depression of being in a place that has no light beyond the absorbing petroleum coke. And then in the Sagdi Well, it's descending into the bowels of the earth. So I'm aspiring to make projects which can do both at the same time, that can draw people in, but can also repel them and can force them to ask different questions about how it is that they live their day-to-day lives. Again, the oil sands is we are producing the oil sands by consuming oil. Driving our cars is why that our actions are what propagates that. So it requires us to be the transformation, I believe. In that project, that's what I'm arguing, is that it's the individual who changes their behavior from the experience into place. Can I go? Thank you.